Good morning and happy Friday. I'm Amber Duke and joined by my co-host Jessica Burbank today. Jessica, good morning.
I just wanted to get another day of rising in with you, Amber.
You just can't stay away. All right, we have a lot of news to get to today, as always, and we're going to start off with Vice President Kamala Harris meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday. The presumptive Democratic presidential nominee delivered remarks following the meeting, expressing her unwavering support for the existence of the State of Israel.
Now, Harris also underscored the need for a ceasefire in Gaza and expressed a forcefulness on ending the war.
So I just had a frank and constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I told him that I will always ensure that Israel is able to defend itself, including from Iran and Iran-backed militias such as Hamas and Hezbollah. I have had an unwavering commitment to the existence of the State of Israel, to its security, and to the people of Israel. I've said it many times, but it bears repeating. Israel has a right to defend itself, and how it does so matters.
Now, Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, met with Harris after he spent almost 3 hours with Joe Biden. They were discussing a Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal. Netanyahu was reportedly disappointed with Harris's remarks after their meeting. One Israeli official said, quote, "We hope that Harris's public criticism of Israel won't give Hamas the impression that there's daylight between the U.S. and Israel, and as a result make it harder to get a deal." The Israeli Prime Minister will meet with former President Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago estate today. It's their first meeting since Trump left the White House, and sources told CNN the meeting was requested by Netanyahu.
Joining us now to discuss is White House columnist at the Hill, Niall Stanage. Niall, good morning. Thank you for joining us. How problematic do you think this could be electorally for Kamala Harris? She has signaled public support for Israel, but also has, of course, suggested there should be a ceasefire. She also put out a pretty strong statement condemning some of the more violent protests that took place in the nation's capital earlier this week. Has she done enough to satisfy the Democratic base that is more pro-Palestinian on this issue?
You know, I think the electoral element of this issue is really complicated. I mean, people, of course, have very strong views on the morality of it in various ways, but electorally it has always been more complicated for Democrats than for Republicans, because most Republican voters are pretty strongly pro-Israel. And the Democratic Party, in terms of its voter base, leans pretty heavily more pro-Palestinian, but isn't without a pro-Israel element. And so I think you see Harris trying to sort of navigate her way through that. The criticisms of the protesters around Union Station here in DC, those were very strong criticisms. Then she, as you showed in the clip you played, both voiced support for Israel and pretty strong criticism of the way it has conducted itself in Gaza. That's an attempt to, as I say, navigate through the democratic politics of it. Those politics are pretty thorny, I think.
Harris finds herself in a really tough position with these pro-Palestine progressives that are considering whether or not to go with Harris. They're in the coconut army right now, which is equally part serious as is a joke. I'm not saying some people think it's a joke and others think it's serious. It's both at the same time for most of the people in this movement. And they want action on Gaza. And it puts Harris in a tough position because she right now is in the Biden administration, not the Harris administration. She's not in a position to deliver action. Do you think these words will be enough to bring in the youth vote?
I think they might be, Jess, if they are perceived as signalling a change. But the problem is exactly the one that you outlined, honestly. Kamala Harris is the presidential candidate at the same time as she's the sitting vice president. So she has no real power yet. I mean, you can argue that influence certainly is moving pretty rapidly toward her and away from President Biden, but it's not her who's setting the policy. So she has to, in a sense, wear a couple of different hats as, on one hand, the supportive vice president and on the other as the presumptive Democratic nominee, I think a lot of us assume she would move maybe 1 or 2 notches more toward a broadly pro-Palestinian position. But that's just based on sort of trying to read between the lines at this point. It isn't based on any substantive policy change, because she doesn't have the power to make one.
Yeah, I wanted to dig into that sort of dichotomy with where Kamala Harris sits right now in terms of her positioning as we head into November, because she was the one who gave this speech shortly after the meetings between both herself and then Joe Biden with the prime minister. And she also is likely trying to demonstrate that she has some kind of foreign policy experience. That has been a weak spot in her previous presidential campaign, as well as her campaigns for Senate. So how exactly does she strike that balance without stepping on the toes of Joe Biden and giving the American people the impression that Joe Biden is basically acting as a lame duck president?
With great difficulty, I think. I just think that is an inherently difficult thing to do, whether one prizes Kamala Harris's political skills highly or not. That's just a difficult task that she has. And I do think its difficulty was shown in particularly stark relief yesterday, because on one hand, it seemed like she wanted those images of her, on the world stage. But then when Netanyahu's coming to visit, that's an image of you beside Benjamin Netanyahu, which is a very problematic image from the point of view of the Democratic base. I think that we do seem to be seeing her move into more of the sort of ceremonial's a bit unfair, actually, just more high-profile moments that she is participating in. The other thing that is very notable, Amber, is just how much more intense the attention is on her now. 2 or 3 weeks ago even, a vice presidential event was kind of a little bit of an afterthought, and you very rarely saw it on any cable news channel unless there was something dramatic happening. I was at the White House immediately after President Biden had stepped aside when she did this event, which was basically in celebration of college athletes, and there were, reams of press there. So she'll get the attention. The question is, does that rebound to her benefit or to her detriment?
It seems that a lot of people are holding on to hope that Kamala Harris will be different once she gets into office upon winning in November on Gaza. But there were protests across D.C. I went to a couple of them downtown. They were overwhelmingly peaceful. MPD was creating a line between a handful of counter protesters to, keep the peace, as they were, I saw on several occasions, getting into the pro-Palestinian protester space. There was some graffiti on a replica of the Liberty Bell that got the attention of many conservatives. Of course, the flag burning, which is a form of protest in the United States that is perfectly legal, I will say, under the First Amendment. But Kamala Harris did pen a letter and put it out as a PDF letter from her office. And this got the attention of some of the protesters. It got the attention of the youth. But I think it might matter that was a letter, and it was to satisfy maybe some of the more conservative members of the Democratic Party, some of the more pro-Israel members of the Democratic Party. But what she said in this speech, how she didn't make those same comments and echo what she said in the letter, do you think that matters? Do you think that signals a change, or are we really just grabbing at nothing here, Niall?
I think as much as we can read those clues, Jessica, it seems to suggest a bit of a change, but I don't think the people who were protesting, around Union Station and elsewhere across DC should yet take too much faith that a Harris presidency, if it arrives, is going to be a kind of free Palestine presidency. I mean, I don't think that's where she stands at all. I think she's trying to display, to a degree, greater empathy for the many, many millions of Americans and people around the world, for that matter, who find the suffering of the Palestinians just horrific and have real human empathy for it. But the letter that you noted was pretty strong, very much so, actually. Just not that anecdotal evidence is necessarily massively dispositive one way or another, but I went down to one of the protests, was speaking to a couple of attendees, including one young woman who said that she planned to vote for the Green Party candidate, even though she was she had mixed feelings because she wanted to vote for a woman who could be the first woman president, i.e. Vice President Harris. But she felt she couldn't do that unless Harris promised much more of a block on any US military aid to Israel in the future.
All right, Niall, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be back with more Rising after this.